RickFlores. I'm an assistant instructor at the Blasco Makeup Center in Hollywood, California. I'm also department head for Guest House Films, and today I will show you how to construct a BaldCap. Okay, so here on my table is your basic setup for your construction of a BaldCap. We have a red head, a plastic red head, and a jack stand for it. I have some Meguiar's high temperature mold release wax. I have a upholstery sponge and makeup sponges. I have some BaldCap rubber, which is also balloon rubber. Any type of mixing bowl will work for the BaldCap rubber. I have a hair dryer. I have cornstarch and a bowl for your cornstarch. I have a makeup puff, and I have a couple of very soft makeup brushes. Okay, so most of these products will be available for you to purchase at themegaMakeupStore.com. Okay, so first I'm going to apply a very thin coat of the mold release wax. And the reason for that is because when the plastic heads are constructed, they're made and put together in halves. So you'll have a seam when you purchase this plastic head. It'll have a rough edge or a rough seam. So you'll want to take some sandpaper and kind of sand it down a little bit first. And then the high temperature mold release wax will fill in any little gaps or grooves that's left on the red head, as well as aid in the release of the BaldCap once you've finished constructing it. So I'm just applying a very thin coat of that, and rubbing it away, just like that. Okay, so this wig plant or vise, which attaches to your table, you can sit your plastic cap on it, but personally I just like to use my hands just because it's easier for me, so I'm gonna go ahead and just set this aside. Some makeup artists like using it. I just choose to not. And next, I'm gonna shake up my bottle of BaldCap rubber. Get my mixing bowl. Pour out, I don't know, I usually eyeball it, but it's about 1/4 of an inch from the bottom of the cup. Set this aside. And what I start with with my first layer is an upholstery sponge, and the reason for that is because of the texture of it. And you want your first layer of the BaldCap to have almost kind of like a Swiss cheese edge for blending. And once I finish with the construction of this BaldCap, you'll understand why once I remove it from this plastic head form, why I'm starting with the first layer of the upholstery sponge. And what I do is, you can see the lines that are drawn on this plastic head. I think a student actually did this. You want to start, depending on the head that you're going to build this BaldCap for, you can take measurements of the talent's head from ear to ear and from front to back, and actually make marks on your plastic head to have like a custom BaldCap. Otherwise, you can just make kind of like a generic BaldCap, and they pretty much fit any head. The further down you start, of course, the larger the BaldCap, the higher up on the forehead of the plastic head, the smaller the BaldCap. So it's probably smarter to start a little bit lower so you have extra BaldCap to play with once you get done. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with the construction of this BaldCap, and I'll just talk my way through it. In my first layer, I'm just going to go ahead and do about an inch and a half thick all the way around, almost like in a horseshoe pattern. And then I'm going to come around the base of the plastic head all the way around the back of the neck. And make sure you get it all the way down. And the reason for that is because once you're applying it to the talent's head, you've got plenty of cap to work with. Okay, so this is pretty much my first layer of BaldCap rubber. It's like I said, in kind of like a horseshoe pattern, all the way down, all the way around the back, and it connects. And once you've done that first layer, what I do is I set my sponge right back from where I picked it up, so I can keep track of the layers. Because you can always step away from constructing this BaldCap if you need to take a break, and then come back, and then you'll know exactly where you've left off or which layer you've left off applying the rubber. So now I'm going to take my blow dryer and I'm going to dry this layer. Now for my next layer, I'm taking a makeup sponge and I'm going to come right up and overlap that first layer, probably about 1/4 of an inch back from where I started the first layer. And I'm just going to follow that pattern all the way around. And now you can see I'm coming back into my BaldCap rubber after stippling some onto this plastic cap. And the reason for that is you want to keep the sponge wet at all times, because you don't want it to pull back on the layer of dried rubber that's already been applied. So it's important keep it moist. So there's my second layer. I just went ahead and followed that first layer all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and dry that. So you can see that that second layer is dried nicely. So now I'm picking up my third sponge, which is upholstery sponge. And I'm going to come right over that edge slightly. And this layer, and this is how I construct BaldCaps. I know other makeup artists who their technique varies. This is my third layer of rubber. And I'm going to take this all the way around like I did the first and second layer. But then I'm also going to take it over the entire head. That's going to begin the actual construction of the entire cap. And you have to be careful with these upholstery sponges, depending on what type you get. This one seems to be picking up a lot of product. And you want to be careful. You don't want any drips or bubbles, because the bubbles can turn into little pinholes. Okay, so here's your third layer. I followed the first and second layer all the way around, and then I went over the entire head with rubber. That's good. Okay, so there's your third layer. Now my fourth layer just begins slightly behind that third layer. Coming around the head. That was my fourth layer. Back to my upholstery sponge. The idea is to start with a very thin edge on your first layer and then build it up as you go back towards the top of the head for sturdiness and durability and stretching purposes. That's my fifth layer. I'm going to dry it. Okay, that was my fifth layer. Now for my sixth layer, I'm basically just going to go and reinforce the crown of the BaldCap. And then I'll start working backwards to also reinforce all the other layers of rubber that I've already applied. So this is just a real small layer of rubber, but it's also an important layer. Because once you get it on the talon's head, and if you need to stretch it, if you have a thick crown, then you don't have to worry so much about it tearing. So there's the sixth layer, and this is usually where I stop building it towards the crown, and then I'll start working backwards. But let me go ahead and dry this, and then I'll continue. Okay, so there's my sixth layer of rubber. And as you can see, it's almost becoming opaque, and that's because of the layers and the thickness. Now for my seventh layer, I'm just going to start here at the crown, and I'm going to just start building backwards. And I'm going to go back probably to over the sixth layer and the fifth layer, and right up against and overlapping that fourth layer. And like I said, what this is doing is just reinforcing all these layers that aren't as thick. That was my seventh layer. You can see that it's also got some texture to it, and that's because of the upholstery sponge that you use, and that's why we alternate the layers with upholstery sponge and makeup sponge, because the density of the makeup sponge and the upholstery sponge are completely different. And the upholstery sponge gives it that texture that you want, when you paint it. Okay, so now I'm on my 8th layer. And I'm going to start at the crown again. I'm going to cover that, the entire crown, bring it back down over that 7th layer that I did, and up against the 3rd layer. Okay, so that was my 8th layer. Now I'm going to go with my 9th layer. 3, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that's back to my upholstery sponge. I'm going to cover the head completely, come all the way up to that 2nd layer. Just get a quick layer of rubber over this entire head, pretty much reinforcing this thin layer. You don't want it too thick in the back though. That's why I started covering the head completely with rubber on my 3rd layer. And the reason you don't want it too thick in the back either is for your blending edge. And it's really hard to apply a bald cap that has a really thick neck to it, because you end up getting, sometimes you have to trim away too much of the bald cap and you end up having a hard edge, which either has to be disguised with Bondo, which is Prozate and Cabosil, or sometimes has to be disguised by wardrobe. So there's my 9th layer. Good. Okay, there's my 9th layer. And I made this cap a little bit bigger than I usually do, so I'm going to go ahead and do a 10th layer and then just bring it right up to that 1st layer where I began, just to reinforce that blending edge. Like I said, I don't want it too thick, because when you begin to remove this cap, as you can see, it's already beginning to roll up. You want that edge, like to be kind of Swiss cheesy in appearance. So you can just float that edge off with some 99% alcohol, and that edge will blend right into the talent's head the way you want without a hard edge. So, and with this layer, I'm just going to come around how I did the first and second layer. I'm not going to go over the entire cap because it seems to be sturdy enough all the way around. You have to be careful using your makeup sponges because sometimes they tend to leave little bits of sponge on the head, and that also could be a recipe for disaster. I mean, if there's one or two, it's not gonna kill it for you. That also aids in the appearance of texture, which most bald heads have. So see, I just followed the perimeter of the head, reinforced all the way around, and this will be my final layer of rubber. I'm going to dry it, and then I will show you how to remove it. Okay, so there's my 10th and final layer. And as you can see here, a little bit of upholstery sponge was left behind. And I'm just going to go ahead and leave it. You don't want to pull any of these off because that'll be a hole left in your bald cap, and you don't want to do that. So I will begin the removal process from this plastic head form. So what I usually do first is I've pre-poured some cornstarch into a bowl, and you take a makeup puff, and I personally like to powder the bald cap first before I begin removing it. And as you can see, the edge is already beginning to roll up. Some makeup artists like to roll the edge of this bald cap up all the way around the perimeter first and then powder. I prefer to do it powder first and then roll the edge. So I'm just going to get this nice and powdered. So I've got it nice and powdered, and then I'll just take a very soft makeup brush and dust all the excess away. And then what I do next is I just begin to roll the edge of this bald cap up and away from the plastic head form. And it just aids in the release of the cap. I'm just going to go around the entire edge, make sure I have it rolled slightly. Just like that, all the way around. Okay, so next what you want to do is you want to take your soft makeup brush and get it into your cornstarch. And I like to start here in the bottom, in one of the corners, and just slowly lift the cap as I'm bringing the powdered makeup sponge underneath and getting as much cornstarch up in there as possible, because you don't want this cap to start releasing from the head form and there not be any cornstarch there, because it'll stick to itself and that creates problems as well. So I'm just gonna take my time and just work all the way around the neck first, pulling back slightly as I'm getting this brush underneath. Try and do it this way. And if you can see, this edge here has a little bit of that Swiss cheesy effect or appearance that you kind of want. So that'll give you a nice thin translucent blending edge that you won't have to try and disguise. So now I'm just getting up in here with this brush and cornstarch and lifting slowly, making sure I get cornstarch in all exposed areas of this cap as I'm slightly lifting it. And it may look like I'm being a little rough with it, but because of the layers of rubber that I've applied, it's getting thicker as I get to the crown. So it's a pretty sturdy cap. And you don't want to use a brush with bristles like boar hair or anything that's, you want something so soft to the touch so it doesn't poke holes through this cap. Once I get to about this stage of release, I hold it different, and I'll just pull back slightly, and you can see where there's cornstarch and where there's no cornstarch, and I'll just kind of go around the edge and get cornstarch up in there, and then I'll pull back a little bit further and do the same. More. pull back on the front a little bit. Get cornstarch up in there. And then about this point, well, actually, here about this point where you only have a little bit of the cap left on plastic head form, I usually just pull it away and get some cornstarch right up in here. You'll flip it back inside out, and there's your BaldCap. It will have a textured rough side, which is the outside, and a smooth side, which is the side that was attached to the head form. And you want to apply it with the smooth side down and the textured side out. But there it is. There's your BaldCap. And if I show you my edge, see here, see this edge here, how it's kind of holy and Swiss cheesy in appearance. That's what you want for your blending edge. So I'm hoping that it's that way all the way around. Okay, so there you have it. There's your BaldCap. Okay, so to reiterate what I just did for you today is I started with my first layer of BaldCap rubber, and I came in a horseshoe pattern in the front of the plastic head form, came all the way around to the bottom of the neck, all the way around the back, then back up in that horseshoe pattern, about 1 inch thick. I went ahead and dried it, and then I went to my second sponge, which is the makeup sponge. I overlapped that first layer about 1/2 inch. I brought that all the way around, followed that pattern. I dried that. I came with my third layer. I overlapped that second layer about 1/4 inch, and that's the layer I began to stipple BaldCap rubber over the entire head. And I went ahead and dried that. And with my fourth layer, I just came a little bit further back, overlapped that third layer slightly, built up BaldCap rubber, dried that. My fifth layer was pretty much just the back of the head, all the way around the back. I dried that layer. My sixth layer was the crown of the head. I dried that layer. And then I came with my seventh layer, and this whole time I'm alternating from upholstery sponge to makeup sponge. My seventh layer covered the sixth layer, the fifth layer, and up and overlapped the fourth layer. Then my eighth layer was the same. I started at the crown, and I just built backwards over all those layers up to about the third layer, maybe overlapping it just slightly. And then usually I stop at a 9th layer, but because this cap was a little bigger than I usually built, I went with a 10th layer. And with my 10th layer, I just kind of reinforced that first 2 layers that I began with. Okay, thank you very much for watching. My name is RickFlores with the Joe Blasco Makeup Center West in Hollywood, California, and you'd be able to purchase most of these products at the MUA TV's megamakeupstore.com.